The sound of splintering fiberglass still echoes in my nightmares. 4:23 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, I'm jolted awake by what sounds like someone taking a sledgehammer to my soul. Racing to my bedroom window in nothing but boxers, I see the most horrifying sight of my 48-year life. My brand new Corvette Stingray, the car I'd saved 3 years to afford, sitting in my driveway with its windshield spiderwebbed into 1,000 pieces and deep gouges carved into the pristine Arctic white paint like scars across perfection. But here's what that HOA dictator Linda Pemberton didn't know while she was busy destroying my $65,000 dream. I was already 3 steps ahead in a game she didn't even realize we were playing. Bank fraud, forged signatures, stolen community funds. I had evidence that would send her to federal prison for the next decade, and in exactly 18 hours, her perfect suburban empire was going to collapse in the most spectacular public humiliation our neighborhood had ever witnessed. What would you do if some power-drunk Karen decided to destroy everything you'd worked for just because they didn't like the color of your success? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because what happened next changed not just our community, but exposed a criminal conspiracy that reached all the way to City Hall. Let me take you back to where this nightmare began. My name is Marcus, and 8 months ago, I thought I was living the American dream. 48 years old, recently promoted to senior project manager at Dallas Construction Solutions, finally making the kind of money that lets you breathe easy at night. After 20 years of apartment living and used cars, I'd scraped together enough for a down payment on a house in Rosewood Glen, one of those pristine suburban developments where every mailbox matches and the lawns look like they're maintained by obsessive-compulsive robots. The first thing I did after closing on the house was fulfill a promise I'd made to my teenage self. I walked into that Chevrolet dealership with a cashier's check for $65,000 and drove home in a 2024 Corvette Stingray in Arctic white that made my heart sing every time I saw it in my rearview mirror. That 495 horsepower LT2 V8 engine sounded like automotive poetry, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I'd actually made it. That feeling lasted exactly 5 days. Enter Linda Pemberton, our self-appointed neighborhood Führer. Picture a woman who looks like she was assembled in a factory that specializes in producing suburban nightmares. Razor-sharp silver hair that never moved in hurricane-force winds, power suits that cost more than most people's rent, and a black BMW X7 she treated like a mobile throne. Her house dominated the end of our cul-de-sac, like a monument to her inflated ego, complete with a lawn so perfect it looked like it was installed by military precision and maintained by teams of landscaping specialists. Linda had ruled our HOA with an iron fist for 7 years, turning what should have been simple community management into her personal feudal kingdom. The harassment campaign began before I'd even finished unpacking. Day 6 in my new paradise, I discovered a violation notice stuffed in my mailbox like a declaration of war. My house numbers were apparently the wrong font style and needed immediate replacement to maintain aesthetic harmony. The approved numbers cost me $127 for pieces of metal that performed exactly the same function as the originals. Then came the systematic persecution disguised as community standards enforcement. Every Wednesday morning, like some twisted ritual, I'd find fresh citations shoved into my mailbox with the enthusiasm of someone feeding parking meters. My garbage cans were positioned 3 inches too far from the curb, $35 fine. My garden hose wasn't wound properly after use, $25 fine. My driveway showed tire marks from normal vehicle use, $50 fine for excessive rubber residue. I could taste the metallic bitterness of pure rage every time I caught sight of her silhouette lurking behind her kitchen curtains, arms crossed like a general surveying a battlefield, that cold smile playing across her lips like she was savoring a private joke at my expense. But when she set her sights on my Corvette, that's when this suburban Cold War erupted into full-scale nuclear conflict. That vehicle violates our community's aesthetic standards, she announced at my first HOA board meeting, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been challenged in her life. The community center reeked of industrial coffee and bureaucratic desperation, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry insects. Linda presided over the proceedings from behind a folding table like a judge delivering death sentences, flanked by 4 other board members who nodded along with everything she said like trained seals programmed for agreement. We maintain certain image expectations here in Rosewood Glen, she continued, her steel gray eyes locked on me like laser-guided missiles. Sports cars project an inappropriate image for our family-oriented community. Inappropriate image. My legally purchased vehicle, parked in my own driveway that I pay taxes on, was somehow offensive to her delicate suburban sensibilities. The citation she slapped down carried a $300 fine and a threat to place a lien on my property if I didn't remedy the situation within 10 days. That night, I stayed awake until 4 a.m., reading every single page of our HOA covenants, contracts, and bylaws. Coffee turned to acid in my stomach as I cross-referenced parking regulations with enforcement procedures, searching for the legal foundation supporting her automotive jihad. What I discovered made my blood pressure spike into stroke territory. Linda was systematically enforcing rules that existed nowhere in our original governing documents. She was making up regulations on the fly, using her position to wage personal vendettas against residents who dared to question her authority. Armed with this evidence, I returned to the next board meeting ready for legal warfare. The room felt smaller, more hostile, thick with the tension of impending confrontation. I presented my research methodically, professionally, demonstrating how her citations violated our own governing documents, state HOA laws, and basic principles of due process. Linda listened with the patience of a predator watching wounded prey struggle in a trap. When I finished my presentation, she leaned back in her chair and delivered the line that transformed this from a civil dispute into a personal war of annihilation. Some people just don't understand that standards exist for a reason, Marcus. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable in a different type of neighborhood. The racial undertone hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. The board voted 5-0 to uphold every citation, and I realized this wasn't about vehicles or aesthetics or community standards. This was about power, control, and putting the uppity new resident firmly in his place. Linda Pemberton had just declared war on the wrong construction manager. What she didn't realize was that 20 years in project management had taught me how to plan complex operations, coordinate multiple teams, and execute strategies that most people couldn't even comprehend. 2 weeks after that humiliating board meeting, I walked out to my driveway for my morning commute and felt my soul shatter into a million pieces. Deep, deliberate scratches ran along the entire passenger side of my Corvette like angry scars across white silk. Jagged gouges that cut through the paint down to bare metal, destroying thousands of dollars of custom finish with surgical precision. The morning air should have smelled like honeysuckle and fresh possibilities, but all I could taste was the metallic tang of destroyed dreams and the bitter poison of pure hatred rising in my throat. Someone had taken a key or screwdriver and methodically dragged it from headlight to tail light, creating damage that would cost more to repair than most people's annual salary. This wasn't random vandalism by teenage delinquents. This was a calculated attack, a declaration of total war disguised as petty property damage. I called the police, fighting to keep my voice steady as Officer Chen filled out his incident report with all the enthusiasm of someone documenting a jaywalking ticket. Probably kids, he said, though the methodical nature of the damage screamed otherwise. No witnesses, no cameras, no physical evidence, nothing we can really do. The repair estimate made me physically nauseated. $4,200 to fix damage that my insurance deductible wouldn't even begin to cover. But Linda had just made her first critical mistake. She'd underestimated a construction manager with 20 years of project coordination experience, comprehensive knowledge of surveillance systems, and absolutely nothing left to lose. That evening, while installing security lighting for a paranoid homeowner across town, I received a text message from my next-door neighbor, Dorothy Kim. Dorothy was 69, had lived alone since her husband's death 3 years earlier, and possessed the sharpest observational skills in the neighborhood. Her message was brief but loaded with implications. "Can you come over? Need to tell you something important about last night." Dorothy's living room smelled like jasmine tea and old secrets. She closed the curtains before sitting me down with trembling hands that had clearly been rehearsing this conversation. "I saw who damaged your car, honey," she whispered, glancing toward her window like Linda might be listening through the walls. "It was around 3 a.m., Mrs. Pemberton's nephew, that college boy Tyler. That 19-year-old punk had been skulking around my driveway with something metallic in his hand, looking around like a burglar afraid of getting caught. My heart rate spiked so hard I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. Will you testify to that, Dorothy?" Her face crumpled like wet tissue paper. "I can't, Marcus. She'll destroy me. Last month, she cited Mrs. Rodriguez for excessive patio furniture exactly 1 week after Rodriguez questioned the landscaping budget at a board meeting. Rodriguez's house has a "for sale" sign now. The pattern crystallized in my mind like a perfect engineering blueprint. Linda eliminated threats by making their lives unbearable until they fled in defeat. But unlike Dorothy, unlike Rodriguez, unlike whoever else had been crushed under her suburban boot heel, I wasn't running anywhere. While Linda probably assumed she'd intimidated me into submission, I was already planning my counterattack. 20 years of managing complex construction projects teaches you something valuable about dealing with problems. When someone tries to sabotage your work, you don't just repair the damage, you upgrade your entire security system and document everything for the inevitable lawsuit. The next morning, I drove to Best Buy and purchased the most sophisticated surveillance system they offered: front, rear, and side-mounted cameras with motion activation, infrared night vision, and automatic cloud storage backup. From my construction background, I knew that security cameras on your own property are completely legal in Texas, and the footage holds up in court as long as they don't point directly into neighbors' windows. My divorce 3 years earlier had taught me the importance of documentation. Your word against theirs means nothing without proof, Marcus, my lawyer had hammered into my head during the custody battle. Document everything and let them hang themselves with their own actions. I spent the weekend running electrical lines and installing the system with the same precision I used on million-dollar commercial projects. The satisfying click of mounting brackets against concrete felt like loading ammunition for the war ahead. Each camera was invisible from street level but captured every angle of my property in crystal clear 4K resolution. Linda's response arrived Monday morning with the predictability of a Swiss timepiece. A city code enforcement officer named Brad Pemberton, obviously some inbred cousin, knocked on my door with a clipboard and the dead-eyed expression of someone doing family favors. Got a complaint about surveillance equipment violating neighbors' privacy, he drawled, with all the intellectual curiosity of a lobotomized goldfish. I walked him around my property, pointing out exactly where each camera was positioned. All on my land, all aimed at my vehicles and entryways, nothing pointing at neighbors' windows or private areas. Brad couldn't find a single violation, but promised to monitor the situation, code for "I'll be back whenever Linda tells me to harass you again." That afternoon brought the real intelligence breakthrough that would change everything. Dorothy called with information that made my construction manager brain start connecting the real pattern here. "There's something else you need to know, honey. 3 other families have moved out in the past 18 months after Linda targeted them. The Washingtons, the Garcias, and that young couple with the twin babies, the Johnsons. The systematic harassment followed the same playbook every time. Sudden violations for microscopic infractions, anonymous complaints to city services, insurance companies mysteriously receiving negative reports about their properties. Challenge Linda's authority, face escalating torment until fleeing became the only escape option." "But here's the crucial part," Dorothy whispered. "The previous secretary, Robert Chen, tried questioning some financial irregularities before he moved. Linda buried him under roof structural violations that 2 different contractors said were complete fabrications. My project manager instinct started connecting the real blueprint here. Linda wasn't just drunk on power, she was covering up something big enough to destroy lives over. And Robert Chen, wherever he'd fled to, held the keys to bringing down her entire operation. That night, I sat in my garage organizing evidence while the smell of motor oil and determination filled the air. My security system was recording everything. My documentation was meticulous, and I had witness testimony about systematic harassment. But as I locked up my tools, I had no idea my cameras were about to capture something that would flip this entire war on its head. 4 nights later, my phone erupted with motion alerts at 3:47 a.m. Half asleep and expecting to see a stray cat, I pulled up the live feed and nearly threw my phone across the bedroom. There, crouched beside my Corvette like some deranged suburban goblin, was Linda Pemberton herself. Not her punk nephew, not some random vandal, not anonymous teenagers. The HOA President was methodically carving lines into my rear quarter panel with a landscaping tool from the community maintenance shed. Her perfectly styled silver hair caught the streetlight while her $400 athleisure outfit absorbed the shadows, and that distinctive Cartier watch, a gaudy gold monstrosity, glinted as she worked with surgical precision. The metallic scraping sound drifted through my bedroom window like fingernails on a chalkboard amplified through stadium speakers. Each deliberate gouge was calculated for maximum financial damage, and the psychopath was clearly enjoying every second of destruction. I could actually see her smiling in the infrared footage as she vandalized thousands of dollars of automotive perfection. Every instinct screamed to charge outside and drag her away from my car by that perfect silver bob, but my divorce attorney's voice echoed in my head like a mantra. "Emotion destroys evidence, Marcus. Stay calm, document everything, and let them destroy themselves." So I lay there in the darkness, recording this felony in real time, watching a 55-year-old suburban terrorist commit crimes with the dedication of a professional car thief. The footage was absolutely damning, but I had a strategic problem. Local police treated neighbor disputes like radioactive waste, especially when the accused sponsors their annual charity barbecue and has the police chief's personal cell number. I needed nuclear-level evidence before making my move, because this would be my only shot at total victory. Linda's next escalation arrived by certified mail the following afternoon, delivered with the bureaucratic smugness that only HOA boards can achieve. Emergency violation notice printed on official letterhead that probably cost more than most people's grocery bills. Unauthorized vehicle modifications detected. Aftermarket performance exhaust system violates community noise ordinances per section 6.3c. Vehicle must be returned to factory specifications or permanently removed from property within 72 hours. Failure to comply will result in immediate professional towing at owner's expense, plus administrative fees totaling $500. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. She was literally attempting to steal my car through paperwork after failing to destroy it with midnight vandalism. The sharp scent of desperation hung around that letter like cheap perfume mixed with pure malice. But while this suburban terrorist thought she was closing her trap, I was about to discover the nuclear bomb that would vaporize her entire criminal empire and send shockwaves through our community for years to come. That evening, Dorothy nervously approached my front door carrying what looked like classified government documents. "There's someone you need to meet," she whispered, glancing around like we were planning a CIA prisoner exchange. "Robert Chen is back in town visiting his mother, and he's been waiting 2 years for someone like you to show up." We met Robert at a grim coffee shop 40 minutes outside our neighborhood, where the bitter aroma of over-roasted beans matched the taste of institutional corruption perfectly. Robert was a skeletal man in his early 60s who looked like he'd been carrying the weight of terrible knowledge for far too long. "She didn't just harass people into leaving," Robert said, his hands trembling as he opened a manila folder thick enough to stop bullets. "Linda Pemberton has been operating a sophisticated embezzlement scheme for 4 years. Fake invoices, shell companies, equipment purchases that never happened. We're talking about $67,000 minimum, probably closer to $90,000. My blood turned to ice water as he spread documents across the sticky coffee shop table. Bank statements, forged contractor invoices, payments to companies that existed only on paper. The most damning evidence was a business registration for Rosewood Property Services, filed under Linda's maiden name, Linda Morrison, with her home address listed as the corporate headquarters. Every month, $800 to $3,000 gets funneled through fake maintenance contracts," Robert continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The timing matches her BMW payments and that kitchen renovation perfectly. She's been financing her lifestyle with stolen community funds while terrorizing anyone who asks questions." But here's where the story took a twist that made my project manager brain spark with pure fury. Robert had tried to expose her before, but the system was rigged against whistleblowers. I filed police reports, contacted the state attorney general, even reached out to local investigative journalists. That's when the real persecution started. Suddenly, my roof needed $25,000 in emergency structural repairs, according to inspectors she brought in. My homeowner's insurance got mysteriously canceled after anonymous reports about foundation problems that 3 different engineers said didn't exist. The woman was running a criminal enterprise from her HOA throne, using community authority like a medieval weapon to crush anyone who threatened her income stream. But she'd made one fatal error. She'd targeted someone with the technical skills to document everything and the project management experience to coordinate a complex takedown operation. Robert slid the complete evidence package across the table like he was passing state secrets. I kept copies of everything: bank records, fraudulent invoices, correspondence with contractors who never stepped foot on our property. I've been waiting 2 years for someone strong enough to finish what I started. That night, I spread Robert's evidence across my kitchen table under harsh LED lighting, the papers rustling like whispered promises of justice. Linda had built herself a perfect suburban crime syndicate, using HOA bylaws as cover for systematic theft and intimidation. But she'd just handed me the keys to her destruction. Tomorrow morning, she expected me to surrender my Corvette and crawl away defeated like all her previous victims. Instead, I was about to detonate her entire world, and my security cameras would capture every beautiful second of her complete annihilation. I set 4 alarms for 5:30 a.m., and went to sleep smiling for the first time since this war began. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp November air that smells like burning leaves and impending justice. I was nursing black coffee on my front porch, watching steam rise from my mug like incense for the war gods, when Officer Martinez's patrol car crunched over the asphalt in my driveway. Martinez stepped out looking like a man who'd rather be chasing real criminals than mediating suburban drama, but he had the decency to actually listen instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. His weary eyes suggested he'd refereed enough neighbor disputes to recognize the difference between petty squabbles and serious criminal activity. "Let's see what we've got here," he said, photographing the fresh gouges in my Corvette's paint while I handed him printouts of the security footage. The images were crystal clear. Linda crouched beside my car at 3:47 a.m., her Cartier watch catching streetlight as she systematically destroyed my property with community maintenance tools. Martinez whistled low and steady. "This is solid evidence, but here's the reality. Property damage between neighbors rarely gets prosecuted unless someone's hospitalized or there's serious money involved. The DA's office treats this stuff like expensive therapy sessions." Before I could respond, the sharp staccato of designer heels on asphalt announced the arrival of our neighborhood's premier psychopath. Linda materialized like a perfectly groomed angel of death, wearing an ivory business suit that cost more than most people's mortgage payments and carrying a leather portfolio that screamed, "I have attorneys," on speed dial. "Officer Martinez, thank God you're here," she gasped, pressing one manicured hand to her throat in a gesture so theatrical it belonged in community theater. "I've been absolutely terrified about the escalating situation with our problematic new resident." What followed was a masterclass in suburban manipulation that would have impressed professional con artists. Crocodile tears gathered in her steel-gray eyes as she produced a collection of photographs from her portfolio, pictures of me checking my mail, washing my car, trimming my hedges, carrying groceries from my truck. Normal human activities transformed into concerning stalker behavior through her twisted narrative. "He's been conducting surveillance on my property, officer, taking photographs, making veiled threats about evening the score over perfectly legitimate HOA violations." Her voice trembled with practiced vulnerability that could have won Academy Awards. "As a woman living alone, I can't help but fear for my safety. Last night I witnessed suspicious activity around his vehicle, but I was too frightened to investigate properly." The sheer audacity left me speechless. She was standing 15 feet from the car she'd personally vandalized just hours earlier, spinning a victim narrative while evidence of her crimes sat in Martinez's hands like smoking guns. The bitter taste of concentrated evil filled my mouth, but my divorce attorney's voice echoed in my head. "Never interrupt your enemy when they're destroying themselves." So I smiled. Actually smiled like she'd just told me the funniest joke I'd ever heard. "Officer Martinez," I said with the calm politeness of a funeral director, "I deeply appreciate Mrs. Pemberton's commitment to neighborhood safety. That's precisely why I installed those security cameras, to protect everyone's property from vandalism and criminal activity." Linda's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flicker of confusion that crossed her face. She'd clearly scripted this confrontation, expecting an explosive outburst, a public meltdown that would validate her dangerous neighbor narrative. My serene response obviously wasn't in her playbook. "I'm sure we can resolve this like civilized adults," I continued, my voice carrying the reasonable tone of someone offering to help elderly people cross busy streets. "After all, we're all invested in maintaining our wonderful community standards." Martinez looked between us like a boxing referee trying to prevent a riot before it started. "Look, I'll file the vandalism report, but without cooperative witnesses, this becomes civil territory. Maybe you folks should work this out through proper channels before lawyers get involved." After he left, Linda lingered on the sidewalk like a shark, sensing blood in suburban waters, probably expecting me to crack under pressure or beg for mercy like her previous victims. Instead, I walked calmly into my house and closed the door with the gentle click of someone putting away fine china. Through my window, I watched her perfect composure fracture as her carefully orchestrated drama dissolved into nothing more than amateur theater. That evening delivered the nuclear bomb that would end this war and reshape our entire community. Dorothy arrived with reinforcements. Helen Park, a retired accountant exiled over Phantom Garden violations, and James Miller, a veteran persecuted for American flag display violations that violated no actual regulations. We assembled in my living room like revolutionaries planning the overthrow of a suburban dictator, sharing war stories that revealed the true scope of Linda's criminal enterprise. Then James dropped the information that made my heart sing with anticipation. "My cousin Rico owns the towing company that's contracted with our HOA. Linda's been authorizing tows for months but never paying the bills. Rico's owed $4,300 and he's about to file liens against HOA assets." The beautiful irony hit me like lightning, striking twice in the same place. Linda had weaponized the towing company against residents while systematically screwing them over financially. But unpaid towing fees create automatic liens against any vehicle owned by the debtor, including that pristine black BMW she worshipped like a mobile shrine to her own importance. I called Rico that night, and his voice carried the weary rage of a small business owner getting systematically robbed by bureaucratic parasites. "Marcus," he said after I explained the situation, "tomorrow morning's going to be very educational for Mrs. Pemberton. Very educational indeed." We arranged to meet at 6:30 a.m. Linda's ultimatum expired at 8 a.m. sharp, and she was expecting to find my Corvette gone when she made her victory lap around the neighborhood. Instead, she was about to learn that some wars end with the enemy losing everything they hold sacred. The next morning, Rico Miller arrived at my doorstep carrying a banker's box that looked like it contained evidence for a federal RICO prosecution. He was a compact bulldog of a man with hands that could strangle a transmission and eyes that had seen enough corporate fraud to power a small city. "Your HOA president is about to have the worst day of her miserable life," Rico announced, setting the box on my kitchen table with the ceremony of someone presenting evidence at a murder trial. "But first, you need to see how deep this corruption really goes." What Rico pulled from that box made my coffee taste like liquid betrayal. Invoice after invoice for legitimate towing services, work his company had actually performed, each one signed with Linda's distinctive flourish. The numbers weren't massive individually, but they painted a picture of systematic theft that would make professional criminals jealous. $347 in unpaid bills stretching back 20 months, Rico said, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a detective finally solving a cold case. But here's where it gets beautiful. I got suspicious about why she kept promising payment but never delivering, so I did some digging into your HOA's banking records. He slapped down a different stack of papers that made my blood pressure spike into the stratosphere. Every month, like clockwork, your HOA cuts checks to Miller Towing for the exact amounts they owe me, but guess what? I never see a dime of that money. The implication hit me like a sledgehammer to the skull. Someone else was cashing those checks. Someone with access to HOA accounts and the authority to intercept payments. Meet Miller Towing Solutions, Rico said, producing business registration documents that should have been evidence in a federal fraud case. Filed 8 months after Linda became HOA President. Registered under the name Rebecca Morrison, that's her sister, with a P.O. box address in the next county. This psychopath had been using Rico's company's reputation to steal from our community while stiffing him on legitimate bills. The scope of the fraud was staggering, but Rico wasn't finished dismantling Linda's suburban crime empire. He spread out bank statements that read like a textbook for white-collar theft, disguised as community management. Your friend Robert was right about missing money, but he severely underestimated the scope. We're not talking $67,000. This woman has embezzled over $110,000 in 4 years. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. Phantom landscaping contracts with companies that provided no services, fake security invoices for patrols that never happened, equipment purchases that existed only on paper, and monthly payments to Rosewood Property Management, a company that provided absolutely nothing except a way to funnel community funds into Linda's personal accounts. But the revelation that made my hands shake with pure rage came next. Remember all those insurance cancellations? Dorothy's policy? Helen's mysterious foundation problems? Robert's roof repairs that 3 contractors said were fabricated? Rico's voice dropped to a whisper that carried more menace than any shout. Your HOA president has been filing false insurance reports on residents who oppose her, using her real estate license to pressure companies into dropping coverage. He produced a folder marked insurance fraud documentation that contained correspondence between Linda and multiple insurance companies, fabricated safety reports, falsified property inspections, and coordinated campaigns to destroy the financial stability of anyone who dared question her authority. She's been weaponizing the entire suburban infrastructure against her own neighbors, Rico continued, his voice shaking with controlled fury. Insurance companies, city code enforcement, contractor networks, she's turned them all into weapons for eliminating threats to her criminal operation. The scope was absolutely breathtaking. Linda hadn't just been stealing money, she'd been systematically destroying lives to protect her theft. The BMW payments, the house renovations, her daughter's private school tuition, even her country club membership, all financed with money stolen from the very people she was supposed to serve. I stared at evidence that could send someone to federal prison for 25 years. Mail fraud, insurance fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, racketeering under RICO statutes. Linda Pemberton had built the perfect suburban crime syndicate, hidden behind manicured lawns and HOA bylaws. So what's the plan? Rico asked, his eyes gleaming with the anticipation of someone about to collect a very overdue debt with compound interest. I looked at the mountain of evidence spread across my kitchen table and felt something cold and precise settle in my chest like liquid nitrogen. We're going to end Linda Pemberton's reign of terror in front of the entire neighborhood, and we're going to make sure she never hurts anyone again. The war was about to become a public execution, and I was about to deliver justice with surgical precision that would be remembered for decades. My garage had been transformed into a command center that would make military strategists weep with envy. The concrete floor was ice cold under my knees as I crawled between evidence stations, spreading documents across every surface like a madman mapping the downfall of a dictator. Robert's financial records covered my main workbench. Rico's invoices were taped to tool cabinets like battle plans, and insurance fraud evidence hung from corkboards like a detective's timeline tracking a serial killer. The air reeked of motor oil, photocopier toner, and the metallic taste of impending justice. Dorothy arrived at dawn carrying coffee that could resurrect the dead and wearing the grim determination of someone who'd finally found her courage after years of intimidation. I called every household that's been targeted, she announced, settling into a folding chair with the authority of a resistance leader. 18 families confirmed they'll testify. People aren't just angry anymore, Marcus. They're ready for blood. Robert shuffled in next, clutching a briefcase containing 4 years of evidence he'd been too terrified to use until now. His hands still trembled from years of abuse, but his voice carried the steel of a man who'd rediscovered his spine. I brought everything: bank statements, canceled checks, correspondence with state investigators who buried my complaints because Linda had political connections throughout the county. Our secret weapon arrived in a sleek Mercedes at exactly 6:30 a.m. Attorney Sarah Kim, a predatory legal shark who specialized in devouring HOA tyrants for breakfast and picking her teeth with their bones. She'd driven down from Dallas after Rico's frantic midnight call, and her first words made my heart sing with anticipation. "This is the most comprehensive HOA fraud documentation I've ever encountered. We're not pursuing civil violations here. This is federal racketeering territory with potential RICO implications." Sarah's briefcase contained legal ammunition that could level small cities. She spread documents across my workbench while explaining how Linda's empire would crumble like a house of cards in a hurricane. Fraudulent liens can be challenged and removed immediately under Texas Property Code Section 51 Cows 1001, but when HOA officers commit mail fraud and sending fake invoices through the Postal Service absolutely qualifies. We're talking federal felony charges with 20-year minimum sentences. The strategy session felt like watching a master general plan the siege of Troy. Multiple fronts would attack simultaneously: criminal charges filed with federal prosecutors, civil litigation seeking treble damages, professional licensing complaints to destroy her real estate career, and media exposure to ensure public humiliation. Linda wouldn't have time to shred evidence or flee to non-extradition countries. Rico had converted my garage corner into a professional surveillance center. 4K cameras, directional microphones, even a drone for aerial documentation. "My insurance requires video evidence for disputed tows," he explained, adjusting equipment with filmmaker precision. "Everything tomorrow gets recorded in broadcast quality with synchronized audio." The technology deployment was military grade. My construction background had taught me that Texas allows single-party consent recording, meaning I could legally capture any conversation without Linda's knowledge. We positioned backup devices throughout the neighborhood, uploaded everything to cloud storage in real time, and stored evidence copies in 3 different states to prevent tampering. Robert had evolved from terrified victim to meticulous forensic accountant, teaching me financial audit techniques that should be required knowledge for every homeowner. "Reserve funds are legally restricted to capital improvements and emergency repairs," he explained, highlighting relevant state statutes. "Mixing reserves with operating accounts is automatic embezzlement, and using community funds for personal expenses violates every fiduciary duty that exists." The audit methods he demonstrated were shockingly simple. Homeowners can demand quarterly financial statements, require contractor receipts, and verify that board meetings follow statutory notification requirements. Most HOA abuse flourishes because residents don't understand their rights, and corrupt boards depend on that ignorance to operate criminal enterprises without oversight. Rico's professional expertise added devastating tactical advantages. Legal towing requires specific procedures: clear signage, 72-hour advance notice, photographic documentation of violations. 90% of HOA tows are technically vehicle theft because they skip mandatory steps. His advice was pure gold for any homeowner facing HOA harassment. Always photograph your vehicle's exact position before leaving, document missing or unclear signage, and demand complete paperwork before paying any towing fees. The timing coordination required Swiss watch precision. Morning rush hour would maximize neighborhood witnesses, school bus schedules guaranteed family presence, and Linda's obsessive routine, mapped through weeks of surveillance, showed she always conducted territorial patrols at exactly 7:45 a.m. Sarah had already briefed Channel 5's investigative reporter Maria Santos, whose HOA corruption exposés had won 2 Emmy Awards and destroyed 3 corrupt boards in the past year. "Maria arrives with full camera crew at 8:15, Sarah explained, her predatory smile promising television gold. HOA abuse stories generate massive ratings, especially with dramatic footage and clear villains getting destroyed in real time. Our media strategy was elegant brutality: document everything live, provide journalists with evidence packages that could sink battleships, and use social media amplification to spread the story nationally. The hashtag "The Shockers of Rosewood Fraud" was already trending locally thanks to Dorothy's Neighborhood Resistance Network, but the psychological warfare element would truly obliterate Linda's soul. Every detail was designed to trigger her control obsessions while publicly stripping away her power in front of the people she'd terrorized for years. Public humiliation was her deepest fear, and we were about to serve it up with a federal indictment chaser. At 3 a.m., I stood surrounded by the instruments of suburban warfare and felt something I hadn't experienced since my promotion to senior manager: absolute certainty of total victory. Tomorrow morning, Linda Pemberton's criminal empire would collapse in spectacular fashion, creating a cautionary tale that would protect communities nationwide. Every document secured, every witness prepared, every camera positioned for maximum devastation. We weren't just winning this war, we were about to make history. At 6:15 a.m., I watched through my kitchen window as Linda's perfectly manicured world began to crack, like an eggshell under pressure. She emerged from her house in a pristine silver bathrobe, probably worth more than most people's car payments, and immediately noticed the unusual activity brewing in our normally sleepy neighborhood. Rico's massive tow truck sat parked legally on the public street like a mechanical vulture, its diesel engine rumbling with barely contained power. The panic in her body language was absolutely delicious to watch. She speed-dialed someone, probably her corrupt board members, while pacing her driveway in designer slippers that had never touched actual pavement before today. Through my security cameras, I could see her gesturing frantically at Rico's truck, her voice carrying across the morning air with the shrill desperation of someone realizing their perfect crime was about to explode in their face. Within 15 minutes, the emergency board meeting materialized in her living room like a gathering of co-conspirators trying to prevent a mutiny. Dorothy's intelligence network was feeding me real-time updates through text messages. 5 board members arrived, lots of shouting. Someone mentioned federal investigators. But while Linda thought she was organizing damage control, I was watching her dig her grave deeper with every desperate move she made. At 7:30, she burst from her house wearing a Navy business suit that screamed, "I'm definitely not guilty of anything," and marched directly toward Rico's truck with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no by anyone who mattered. The morning dew crunched under her designer heels as she approached Rico like a suburban general, confronting enemy forces on her own territory. "You need to move this truck immediately," she demanded, her voice carrying that particular brand of entitled authority that made my teeth ache with secondhand embarrassment. "This is private property and you're trespassing on HOA-controlled areas." Rico stepped out of his cab with the unhurried movements of someone who dealt with entitled customers for 25 years. He was a compact mountain of muscle wearing coveralls that had seen honest work, and his smile carried the satisfaction of someone about to collect a very overdue debt. "Ma'am, I'm parked on a public street with proper documentation," Rico replied, his voice calm but carrying undertones of barely controlled satisfaction. "I'm here to collect payment for services rendered to your HOA, $4,347 in unpaid invoices." Linda's face cycled through expressions like a broken slot machine hitting random combinations. Confusion, anger, dismissal, then back to panic as she realized this wasn't going according to any script she'd prepared. "That's impossible," she sputtered, her perfectly controlled voice cracking for the first time. "Our treasurer handles all payments. There must be some accounting error." "No error," Rico said, producing a folder thick enough to choke a horse. 20 months of legitimate towing services, all authorized by your signature. 0 payments received. But here's the interesting part. Your HOA bank statements show monthly payments to Miller Towing Solutions. Know anything about that company?" The color drained from Linda's face like someone had opened a valve in her neck. Her sister's fraudulent company had just been exposed in front of witnesses, and I could practically hear her calculating how many federal laws she'd broken in the past 4 years. The morning air suddenly felt electric with the tension of a cornered predator realizing the trap had already snapped shut around their legs. That's when Officer Martinez arrived, responding to what was probably Linda's frantic 911 call about harassment and trespassing. Martinez stepped out of his patrol car looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else, carrying the weary expression of someone who recognized this address from yesterday's vandalism report. "Morning, folks," Martinez said, his tone professionally neutral but tinged with the exhaustion of someone who'd refereed this exact type of suburban drama too many times. "Got a call about a disturbance. What seems to be the problem here?" Linda immediately switched into victim mode with the smooth transition of a professional con artist who'd perfected her performance over years of practice. "Officer, this man is harassing me and blocking access to my property," she announced with theatrical desperation. "I've asked him repeatedly to leave, but he's making threats about money we don't owe and intimidating a woman living alone." Rico's response was pure professional satisfaction. He handed Martinez the complete documentation package with the ceremony of someone presenting evidence at a federal trial. "Officer, I'm attempting to collect legitimate debts through legal channels. These documents show 20 months of unpaid bills and evidence of systematic fraud involving fake companies and stolen community funds." Martinez studied the paperwork with growing interest, his expression shifting from bored civil enforcement to serious criminal investigation as he realized he was looking at evidence of federal crimes. Linda stood frozen in her driveway like a deer caught in headlights, watching her carefully constructed empire collapse around her designer heels. The woman who terrorized an entire neighborhood was about to discover that some predators eventually become prey. And the best part? We were just getting started. By 7:45 a.m., our normally quiet suburban street had transformed into a battlefield that reeked of diesel exhaust, desperation, and the sweet smell of justice finally being served. Linda stood in the eye of this growing storm, her designer business suit wrinkled from nervous sweating, watching her perfect world disintegrate like sugar in acid rain. Her next move was pure panic disguised as political power. She jabbed at her phone with trembling fingers, speed dialing what she clearly believed was her get-out-of-jail-free card. "Mayor Davidson, this is Linda Pemberton from Rosewood Glen," she announced loud enough for everyone to hear. "I need immediate intervention to stop this media circus from destroying our community's reputation." Even from 30 feet away, we could hear the mayor's aide deliver the political kiss of death, a polite but firm statement that the mayor's office doesn't interfere in civil HOA disputes, especially those involving potential criminal activity. When Linda hung up, her face had turned the color of old cottage cheese, and her hands shook like someone experiencing withdrawal from suburban power. But this woman was nothing if not creatively vicious in her desperation. She turned to Officer Martinez with the entitled fury of someone who'd never heard the word no from anyone who mattered. "Officer, I want you to understand that certain city officials have special arrangements with our association," she said with the confidence of someone used to making problems disappear through connections. "This harassment could have serious political consequences for everyone involved." The implied blackmail hung in the morning air like sulfur from hell itself. Martinez's expression shifted from professional patience to barely controlled disgust. In one sentence, Linda had managed to threaten a police officer while implicating herself in municipal corruption. That's when her co-conspirators arrived like rats fleeing a sinking ship. 4 board members who'd been summoned by her frantic emergency calls approached the crowd with the nervous energy of people who'd just realized they might be accessories to federal crimes. Board Secretary Jennifer Walsh took one look at the evidence mountain spread across Rico's truck and immediately started throwing Linda under the bus with the enthusiasm of someone avoiding prison time. "I never saw any of these invoices," she announced loud enough for the gathering news cameras. Linda always claimed the treasurer handled all financial decisions independently. Board member Tom Rodriguez was even more brutal in his betrayal. "We were told these were routine expenses approved by previous boards. Nobody ever showed us actual contractor agreements or receipts." The panic in his voice was delicious as he realized his signature might be on fraudulent documents that could send him to federal prison for conspiracy charges. The beautiful thing about watching criminal conspiracies collapse is how quickly loyalty evaporates when faced with 20-year sentences. Within minutes, Linda's hand-picked board was providing Officer Martinez with testimony that contradicted every lie she'd told about proper procedures and unanimous approval. But Linda's final gambit was her most spectacularly unhinged move yet. She called Channel 5 News directly, apparently believing she could control the narrative by striking first with her own version of events. "I need to report a coordinated harassment campaign by dangerous neighbors who are making terroristic threats against community leaders," she told whoever answered, her voice cracking with hysteria that could be heard 3 houses away. The cosmic irony was breathtaking. She was calling the exact investigative team that Sarah Kim had already briefed about her crimes, practically inviting them to witness her public execution. The sound of news van engines rumbling in the distance made Linda's face light up with false hope, like someone who thought the cavalry was coming to rescue her instead of film her complete destruction for evening news broadcasts. Investigative reporter Maria Santos stepped out of that news van like a predatory shark smelling blood in suburban waters. She carried a folder containing every piece of evidence we'd provided, and her opening question was pure television gold that would probably win her another Emmy. "Mrs. Pemberton, would you care to comment on documented allegations that you've systematically embezzled over $110,000 from community funds while using your position to terrorize residents into silence?" The look on Linda's face was worth every sleepless night I'd spent planning this moment. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air, while high-definition cameras captured every microsecond of her psychological collapse for primetime broadcasts. But the moment that truly broke her came when Robert stepped forward carrying his briefcase of financial evidence like a briefcase full of kryptonite. "I have 4 years of bank statements proving systematic theft," he announced to the cameras with the quiet dignity of someone finally getting justice. "This woman destroyed my life to cover up her crimes, and I have documented proof of every single fraudulent transaction." The crowd had swelled to over 50 neighbors, many filming with phones as our suburban dictator realized she was completely surrounded by witnesses, evidence, and the consequences of her own evil actions. The woman who'd ruled through fear and intimidation was experiencing her own terror for the first time in years. Officer Martinez made the call that would end her life as she knew it. "Dispatch, I need detectives and federal investigators at Rosewood Glen immediately. We have evidence of mail fraud, embezzlement, racketeering, and conspiracy involving potential municipal corruption." Those words, federal investigators, hit Linda like a physical slap. She staggered toward her house, probably planning to shred evidence or flee the country like some white-collar fugitive. But Rico's tow truck was already positioning itself behind her precious black BMW with mechanical precision. "Ma'am," Rico called out with professional politeness that dripped satisfaction like honey from a broken jar. "Your vehicle is subject to immediate impoundment due to unpaid liens totaling $5,200. plus accumulated interest and administrative fees. The hook attached to her BMW with the finality of divine judgment. As that black symbol of stolen prosperity lifted off the ground, Linda released a sound that was part banshee wail, part death rattle, and entirely the collapse of a criminal empire. The neighborhood erupted in applause that could probably be heard 4 blocks away. By 8:30 a.m., our suburban battlefield had reached critical mass. Over 70 residents filled the street like an angry mob, finally witnessing their tormentor's public execution. The air crackled with electricity from news cameras, diesel engines, and the pure voltage of justice being served in high definition. Children pressed against school bus windows while their parents filmed everything on phones that would make this moment internet legend. Linda stood trapped on her own front porch like a cornered animal, her designer suit now wrinkled and stained with nervous sweat that no amount of expensive perfume could mask. The woman who'd terrorized our community from behind manicured lawns and legal paperwork was about to face the consequences of her crimes in front of everyone she'd victimized. Federal investigators had arrived in unmarked sedans that screamed government authority, followed by county prosecutors who'd been monitoring the situation through Sarah Kim's connections. The sight of federal badges made several board members immediately request lawyers while Linda's face cycled through every stage of grief at hyperspeed. That's when she made her final desperate attempt to control the narrative. Linda grabbed a microphone from the Channel 5 news crew and climbed onto her porch railing like some deranged suburban politician making a campaign speech. "Neighbors, friends," she shouted, her voice carrying the shrill desperation of someone drowning in their own lies. "What you're witnessing is a coordinated attack on our community values by outside agitators who want to destroy everything we've built together." The crowd responded with jeers and laughter that echoed off every house in the development. Someone in the back shouted, "What about our stolen money, Linda?" while another voice called out, "Tell us about your sister's fake company." But I wasn't about to let this criminal hijack her own public execution. I stepped forward and took the microphone from her trembling hands with the calm authority of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. 4 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly across the crowd, this woman began systematically stealing from our community while using her position to destroy anyone who questioned her authority. The crowd fell silent as I held up the evidence that would end her life as she knew it. Bank records show $110,000 in embezzled funds, insurance fraud targeting families who dared to speak up, fake companies designed to launder stolen money through her sister's accounts. Linda tried to interrupt, but her voice cracked like breaking glass. "These are lies, fabrications by a disgruntled resident who has video footage of you personally vandalizing my car at 3:47 in the morning?" I cut her off, holding up my phone displaying the crystal clear security footage. "Who has your signature on fraudulent invoices? Who has testimony from contractors you never paid and residents you systematically terrorized?" The crowd erupted in applause that shook windows throughout the neighborhood. Dorothy stepped forward with tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "This woman canceled my insurance with false reports. She forced me to choose between fighting lies and losing my home." Robert's voice carried the weight of 4 years of suppressed fury. "She buried me under fabricated violations when I tried to audit the finances. Made my life hell until I fled like a refugee from my own neighborhood." Helen Park, who'd driven back from her new home 3 counties away just for this moment, spoke with the quiet dignity of someone finally getting justice. "She destroyed my garden, then fined me for the damage, used my love of flowers as a weapon against me." One by one, victims stepped forward to testify about years of systematic abuse while cameras captured every word for posterity. The crowd grew angrier with each revelation, and Linda shrank smaller with every testimony until she looked like a wilted flower in expensive clothing. That's when Federal Agent Chen stepped onto the porch carrying handcuffs and a warrant that had been expedited through channels Sarah Kim had spent years cultivating. "Linda Pemberton," Agent Chen announced, his voice carrying the authority of the federal government. "You're under arrest for mail fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, and racketeering under federal RICO statutes." The Miranda rights echoed across our neighborhood like a funeral dirge for suburban tyranny. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The crowd erupted in cheers that could probably be heard in the next county. Children on the school bus pressed against windows while parents held up phones to capture this historical moment of community justice. But the absolute perfect climax came when Rico's tow truck finally lifted Linda's BMW completely off the ground. As that black symbol of stolen prosperity swayed in the morning air, the woman who'd ruled through fear and intimidation was led away in handcuffs past the car she'd bought with our stolen money. "This is what happens," I said into the news microphones, "when communities stand together against corruption, when neighbors support each other instead of living in fear, when good people refuse to be silenced by bullies in business suits." The applause was deafening, but the most beautiful sound was something we hadn't heard in our neighborhood for years, the laughter of people who were finally free. Officer Martinez closed his report with the most satisfying words I'd ever heard. Suspect in federal custody. Community threat neutralized. Investigation ongoing. Our long nightmare was finally over, but the celebration was just beginning. 8 months later, I'm sitting on my front porch watching kids play safely in the street for the first time in years, and the transformation of our community still takes my breath away. The morning air carries the sound of laughter instead of fear, and neighbors actually wave to each other instead of hurrying inside to avoid confrontation. Linda's sentencing hearing was everything we could have hoped for, and more. Federal Judge Patricia Williams didn't hold back when delivering justice. 4 years in federal prison, 5 years probation, and full restitution totaling $167,000, including interest, penalties, and legal fees. The woman who terrorized families from behind her HOA throne was led away in an orange jumpsuit that matched her new reality perfectly. The federal conviction meant no early release, no house arrest, no country club minimum security. Linda was experiencing real consequences for the first time in her privileged life, and every day of her sentence represented justice for another family she'd destroyed. Our community's financial recovery exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. The frozen bank accounts contained not just the stolen funds, but 4 years of accumulated interest that Linda had been too arrogant to spend. Property liens secured additional damages from the sale of her house, which sold at auction for enough money to completely renovate our neglected common areas and establish a substantial reserve fund. My Corvette received the full restoration it deserved, courtesy of a community fundraiser that raised 3 times the repair costs within 2 weeks. The excess money went toward a neighborhood legal defense fund, ensuring no future HOA board could terrorize residents without facing organized resistance armed with professional legal representation. The car now gleams in my driveway like a symbol of what happens when you fight back against bullies and refuse to be intimidated by corrupt authority. The new HOA board operates with the transparency of a nonprofit organization. Monthly meetings are live-streamed, financial records are posted online quarterly, and every major decision requires community input through digital voting systems. Robert was elected treasurer by unanimous vote, and his first act was implementing audit procedures that make embezzlement virtually impossible. Dorothy has become our neighborhood's unofficial historian, documenting Linda's crimes for a book about suburban corruption that's already attracted interest from 3 major publishers. Her courage in speaking up first inspired dozens of other residents to share their own stories of abuse and intimidation. Rico's business has exploded with new clients after his role in exposing the fraud became local legend. Honest contractors across the region now use his company exclusively, and he's become a go-to expert for HOA boards seeking legitimate towing services. His integrity turned a simple billing dispute into a catalyst for community justice. Sarah Kim's legal victory became a landmark case cited in HOA reform legislation across 4 states. Her successful prosecution of Linda set precedents that protect homeowners from board abuse nationwide. She now specializes exclusively in HOA corruption cases and has a waiting list of communities seeking her help. The ripple effects continue spreading throughout our region. 15 other HOAs have requested voluntary audits after our story made national news. State legislators passed the Rosewood Act, requiring annual financial transparency reports and criminal background checks for all HOA board candidates. Federal oversight of community associations has increased dramatically, with new penalties for board misconduct. Our annual Community Freedom Festival celebrates the anniversary of Linda's arrest with food trucks, live music, and educational booths about homeowner rights. This year's festival raised $22,000 for a legal aid scholarship program that helps low-income families fight HOA abuse. The event has become a model for communities nationwide seeking to build solidarity and prevent future corruption. The scholarship fund operates from Robert's old house, which the new board purchased as a community center using recovered stolen funds. Children now play where Linda once plotted to destroy families, and the irony tastes sweeter than anything I've ever experienced. But the most satisfying change is personal. I found my place in this community as someone residents trust to fight for what's right. My construction management business has grown through referrals from neighbors who know I stand up to bullies, and I've helped 4 other communities expose similar corruption schemes. The phone rang yesterday with a call from a desperate homeowner, 3 counties over whose HOA board is targeting families with fabricated violations and suspicious financial irregularities. The voice on the other end was shaking with fear but also hope. I heard what happened in Rosewood Glen. Can you help us? I looked out at kids riding bikes safely in our streets, at neighbors chatting over garden fences, at Dorothy tending flowers that nobody will ever fine her for growing, and smiled. We're on our way, I told them. Because some fights are worth having, and some victories need to be shared. If you're trapped under an HOA tyrant's boot, share your story in the comments. Our legal defense network is growing stronger every day, and we're building a nationwide movement to protect homeowners from corrupt boards. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about ordinary people fighting extraordinary corruption and winning. Sometimes David doesn't just beat Goliath, he inspires an entire army of slingshot warriors ready to take down the next giant. Thanks for watching HOA Nightmares. If this episode made you want to fight back against corruption or shake your head at HOA madness, hit that like button and drop your opinion below. We post HOA Karen Chaos and neighborhood justice stories every week, so be sure to subscribe to catch the next unbelievable story of community heroes taking down suburban tyrants.